A flash flood kills in the Midwest. The Family Medical Leave Bill heads for a President Bush veto. And vigilante violence terrorizes Romania again. This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. And the rains came. For the last 2 weeks, more than a foot of rain has fallen on a hilly coal mining region of southeast Ohio. Last night, another 5 inches of rain came down in a series of thunderstorms. The result, a natural disaster in which at least 16 people died, 50 more are missing, and scores are homeless. Edie Magnus is on the scene.
The devastation is staggering and stretches for miles. The flood tore houses and trailers from their foundations and hurled them hundreds of yards. Its arrival shortly after 9 o'clock last night could be summed up in 4 words.
Too much, too fast.
Carol Williams lost her home of 21 years and nearly lost her life when a wall of water rolled through.
Everything went. My dog, my Doberman, I couldn't get in. He went. He's dead. And it, just everything.
Charles Gibbons survived by climbing a tree.
1 minute the creek's running fast, the next minute 20-foot wall of water come right over the top of the road. Never seen nothing like that in my life.
No one was prepared. A flash flood watch, not a warning, was in effect. And there are now allegations by the union representing employees of the National Weather Service that the office responsible for this region was understaffed. The search for the victims is taking place on land, by air, and in the waters of several creeks, which by some accounts crested at 20 to 30 feet above flood level at the height of the storm.
You can literally go in the order of a few minutes from a relatively safe condition to an extremely dangerous one along a stream.
I haven't seen as deadly a disaster as this since the Xenia tornado 20 years ago.
The state had already declared 13 Ohio counties disaster areas because of flooding and tornadoes over the past couple of weeks. Now, 4 more counties have been added to the list. Those left homeless are taking refuge in a temporary shelter at a local high school, along with families who are missing loved ones, who can only wait and hope. As the agonizing search for more victims continues, there is growing concern here over what may happen overnight. The forecast? A chance for more violent storms. Edie Magnus, CBS News, Shady Side, Ohio.
In the Gulf of Mexico, where that huge Norwegian tanker has been burning for a week, there is a flicker of encouraging news tonight. But the Gulf, much of it has been polluted, and the threat of fuel oil polluting the Texas coast still looms. Scott Pelley has the latest.
The fire on the Mega Borg appears to be out this evening. Free from smoke for the first time, the ship's superstructure is ripped in two, the stern awash.
At the current time, they are just mopping up a few hot spots left in the area.
The oil leak appears to be subsiding, but a 35-mile slick already stretches from the ship. Skimming vessels are working between the spill and the shore. But oil will hit an area most likely on a 70-mile length of coastline, with Galveston at its center.
It's likely to be coming onshore in small fragments in around Sunday afternoon, perhaps, but perhaps Monday or so it will be coming on in much greater quantities.
If it were my front yard, I'd say there's going to be oil there, and nobody's going to like it. But whether it's a lot compared to, say, what we see at other spills, I'd say probably not.
On Galveston Island, barriers have been built and equipment is being stockpiled. At sea, the state of Texas mixed up an experimental solution, spraying the slick with oil-eating bacteria. The hope is to break up the spill as much as possible on its 25-mile trip to shore. Salvage experts plan to allow the ship to cool for up to 2 days before trying to pump out more than 30 million gallons of oil that remain on board. As for the fate of the Mega Borg itself, its owners believe it may soon be sailing for the scrap pile. Scott Pelley, CBS News, Galveston.
U.S. law enforcement officials made high publicity sweeps aimed at violent street gangs today, gangs that now operate from state to state and deal drugs. Ron Allen has our report.
Federal agents put out a dragnet attacking what they say is an emerging form of organized crime. Street gangs, based in Los Angeles but spreading their influence across the country. gang members charged with trafficking in drugs and violence.
We've targeted the Crips and the Bloods largely because of their violent history of involvement in numerous murders and drive-by shootings across the country.
The exportation of the drugs and violence by the Crips and the Bloods has gone into about 69 cities throughout the country in 32 states.
In Tacoma, Washington, the reputed leader of the local Bloods chapter was arrested. So were gang members in Portland, Oregon and St. Louis, Missouri. Nearly 200 people in 9 states have been arrested on federal drug and weapons charges that often carry mandatory jail sentences. It's a high-profile operation. Agents and vehicles flown in by military jet from Washington to Los Angeles, where most of the arrests were made. Reporters and photographers were invited along. It's called Operation Street Sweep, but residents of gang-infested neighborhoods were not impressed.
I'm surprised to see a whole army come to bust one little funky rock house. I mean, if they're going to have to use this many police to bust every rock house in the neighborhood, we can't afford it.
I thought they was making a movie out there with so many cameras, that's all.
Federal authorities insist this was not a publicity stunt, but another pitched battle in their war on drugs. Ron Allen, CBS News, Los Angeles.
In Detroit, at least 8 people were killed and more than 20 others injured early today in the wake of the National Basketball Association Championship. Frank Courier reports on the ugly aftermath of that pro title game.
Vinnie Johnson with 1 second to go. His shot is good! And the game's over, and the Pistons have won the World Championship.
21,000 hysterical fans packed the Palace in Detroit to watch the Pistons in Portland beat the Trailblazers for their second consecutive NBA title.
They're going wild at the Palace.
And almost immediately, they went wild on the streets of Detroit. A 4-hour-long rampage of violence. Police in full riot gear had expected celebrations, the cheering, beer drinking, and horn honking that started the night. They did not expect the window smashing, scattered looting, fights, and flaming cars. At times, police could only stand back and watch as fire trucks battled through traffic. For many, it was reminiscent of 1984, when Detroit won the World Series and thousands of revelers poured into the streets, setting fires around Tiger Stadium. Amid smashed glass, the cleanup this time went long into the night. Storekeepers today tallying their losses, shaking their heads.
I'm a Piston fan as well as anyone else, and I was happy that they won, but destroying people's property is totally ridiculous.
The team returned to town today, purposely avoiding big crowds by landing at a small suburban airport. Detroit will try again Monday to salute the victorious Pistons officially and peacefully with a parade and a rally at the Palace. Frank Courier, CBS News, Chicago.
President Bush said again today he will veto the family leave bill. Under this bill passed by Congress last night, new parents and workers with documented serious illness in the family would be entitled to unpaid leave from their jobs in many businesses. Bob Schieffer reports on an issue affecting millions of working Americans.
As the president headed out for a long weekend at Camp David, a reporter asked, "Will you veto the parental leave bill?" When he nodded yes, that set off a Democratic stampede to the microphone.
Every other industrialized nation in the world, with the exception of South Africa, has a program for family leave during the joyful crisis of birth or adoption, or the tragic crisis of serious illness.
It is critical if you believe in the family.
This is not a benefit. This is basically a protection.
And a delicious political issue for Democrats, who pointed today to this 1988 rally when candidate George Bush said he favored the idea of parental leave.
We also need to assure that women don't have to worry about getting their jobs back after having a child or caring for a child during a serious illness. This is what I mean when I talk about a gentler nation.
Working women are the main beneficiaries of the legislation, which would require large businesses to give workers up to 12 weeks of unpaid time off for parental leave or during a family crisis. The business lobby fought the bill, and the president's supporters say he was right to change his mind.
The Congress ought not to, just as a matter of law, dictate to employers and employees which benefits they're provided in the workplace.
But by mid-afternoon, women's groups were already gearing up for a fight.
We are prepared to work until that veto is overridden and launch the largest pro-family campaign this nation has ever seen.
The bill's Republican supporters also urge the president to reconsider.
I'm hoping that the president will change his mind and that he will decide that this is in concurrence with the promise that he made.
In truth, that may be the best hope for the bill's supporters who don't have the votes yet to override a veto. But the Democrats can use it as a political issue because, as George Bush proved in 1988, it's a good one. Bob Schieffer, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
President Bush vetoed another bill today. That bill would have eased restrictions on political activities by more than 3 million federal workers, restrictions imposed under the 51-year-old Hatch Act. Straight ahead on the CBS Evening News, correspondent Betsy Aaron on street thugs in the capital of Romania. And Mark Phillips on an American town left stranded by the decline of the railroads. The United States joined a chorus of outrage today over the Romanian government's terror tactics against student demonstrators. The illusion of a newly democratic Romania was shattered yesterday when the president-elect, a former communist, called thousands of thugs into the capital and turned them loose against anti-communist protesters. At least 5 people were killed before things seemed to quieten down at least a bit tonight. Betsy Aaron covered the day's events in Bucharest.
It was almost too good to be true. The miners were about to leave Bucharest. But then, for some unknown reason, they changed their minds with a vengeance. The herd moved towards University Square. For a second day, miners were out for blood. "Show me your identification. Who are you?" they say. Her friend tries to help. He says, "Let her alone, she's sick." An incident right across the street from the American embassy. There's been a question in this place today about just who controlled the city, Ion Iliescu, the president of Romania, or the miners.
It's not the president who gives them the power. They took the power by themselves because they are a power.
Legea dreptății. We consider we have taken the law of justice in our hands, not the written law. In a civilized country, that is the law we take in our hands.
The miners fight for Iliescu because in January he doubled their pay and shortened their hours. Today the president thanked them for what he called their bravery, and then he asked them to leave. And finally, this evening, many of them did, leaving behind the injured. He is a student leader who spoke out in opposition to this government. And this is what miners did to the home of a political opponent of Iliescu's, Ion Rațiu.
Everything that belonged to me was destroyed.
Tonight in University Square, the place where thousands demonstrated, there are no protesters and there are no miners. There are only the police, once again protecting the people. Betsy Aaron, CBS News, Bucharest.
Pope John Paul met Nelson Mandela today and gave his blessing to Mandela's efforts to end apartheid. In a private audience, Mandela asked the Pope to speak out in support of maintaining world economic sanctions against South Africa. The Pope did not respond directly, but said, "God bless you and your initiatives." Mandela's world tour comes to the United States next week. Federal officials announced the arrest of a Los Angeles engineer today. Ronald Hoffman is accused of illegally exporting Star Wars technology research to foreign countries, reportedly including West Germany, South Africa, and possibly Israel. Stay here with us now for more news, including Bill Whitaker on some American companies that have hit the jackpot in Japan. President Bush reversed course today and said he will now authorize the United States to contribute to a new international environmental fund. That fund is aimed at helping poor countries phase out use of chemicals that deplete the Earth's protective ozone layer. Mr. Bush had been taking heavy international criticism ever since it was announced last month that the United States would not contribute to the environmental fund. The Commerce Department reports the U.S. trade deficit was less than $7 billion for the month of April. That's the second best performance in more than 6 years. Once again, though, trade with Japan accounted for most of the still very large deficit. And U.S.-Japanese talks aimed at reducing the trade gap have once again bogged down. Secretary of State Baker met with the Japanese foreign minister in San Francisco today, trying again to get the negotiations back on track. In Tokyo, CBS News correspondent Bill Whitaker has been looking into the trade story from the far side of the Pacific.
Obscured by all the hot air about U.S.-Japan trade frictions is the fact that some American companies are flying high in Japan. After years of trying to focus in on the lucrative Japanese market, U.S. photo giant Eastman Kodak finally hit it big with a new wide-angle disposable camera developed specifically for the discriminating Japanese consumer.
If you really want to be a global competitor, I don't believe you can do that without a presence in Japan.
From software to soda pop, hundreds of American companies are earning billions in Japan. Coca-Cola earns more in Japan than in America. At the huge Kansai Airport project near Osaka, most of the earth is being moved by big American Caterpillar equipment. But while some U.S. companies like McDonald's are sizzling in Japan, others like Avon, Chrysler, and General Motors are pulling out or scaling back, cashing in Japanese operations to boost balance sheets back home. Japanese charge they're giving up too soon, unwilling to invest the time and money needed to succeed here. Many American managers agree.
Somehow we have to find some people willing to make that investment. And if we don't, I'm not sure if all the things the government does or talks about or beats up on the Japanese is going to bring us any instant successes in correcting trade balances.
But often trying hard is not enough. Caterpillar trucks may be working on the multi-billion-dollar Kansai Airport, but not one American contractor has gotten a piece of the action. After years of trying to break in, U.S. construction companies find that sector of the Japanese...
Joe sits over here on the...
So I get to sit over here?
Yeah.
Oh, he doesn't get a back on his chair?
Distance and patience. That doesn't always guarantee, though, that the other side of the table is going to be open.
Still, American business people keep trying. The Cincinnati Rib King and his staff came hoping to take a bite out of the Japanese market.
Potential's phenomenal. We could increase our business tenfold by just being here in Japan.
So even though some American companies have given up on Japan, others still struggle to appeal to the tastes of the world's second largest market. Bill Whitaker, CBS News, Tokyo.
Billionaire developer Donald Trump came up about $30 million short today. Trump announced he would not pay the interest due on bonds that financed the Trump Castle Casino in Atlantic City. It was the latest episode in Trump's cash crisis. He said negotiations with banks are continuing and other interest payments have been made. The Labor Department reported today that consumer prices were up 0.2% in May. This brought the annual inflation rate to 5.8%. Higher than last year at this time, but lower than in the first quarter. It's not too far as the crow flies from the flood-devastated Ohio area we reported on earlier to a West Virginia town where the folks are devastated in another way. Correspondent Mark Phillips has the story of this town and its unusual approach to rehabilitation.
Lost in a forgotten fold of the Appalachians is the former railroad boomtown of Hinton, West Virginia.
Allegiance to the flag.
School kids here still recite the Pledge of Allegiance, but this is a town that has so lost faith in the institutions of government that it has launched an extraordinary appeal.
One nation, under God.
The state health department kept telling us to seek novel avenues of funding. So as a result, we applied for foreign aid to the Soviet Union.
Foreign aid?
Yes, to the Soviet Union, to Great Britain, to France, and to the World Health Organization.
Okay, 134 over 82, and that's okay.
It's part desperation, part publicity stunt. But the local health department has actually appealed for foreign aid because it's broke. And because the county and state governments say that with the end of federal revenue sharing, where the richer states helped out the poorer, they have no more money to give, a common problem in rural America.
How much you've lost? We had 13 cents in our budget.
13 cents.
And owed $4,200 worth of utility bills and things.
Hinton is not one of those backcountry towns that has always had to scrape out a hard living. The town has a grand past. The freight trains just roll on by now, but in the golden age of steam, they stopped for water and coal at the major rail yard that was Hinton's life's blood. The railroad gave Hinton its prosperity, and the railroad took it away. Where well-turned-out Hintonians once thronged to a downtown that boasted 15 hotels and 2 opera houses, today the retired elderly are left. The young have mostly gone elsewhere to seek work. Where once it seemed the entire town proudly posed on the main square, there is a much less festive view today.
The sad irony of Hinton is that just when it went into an economic freefall, the safety net of municipal services was taken away. For many who need it most, there will simply be no access to rudimentary health care unless the money comes from somewhere.
You may choose to prevent pregnancy by using birth control.
And they do need the free health care this clinic provides. For the young who stayed behind, the unemployment rate is more than twice the national average. Many have no health insurance. Hinton is one of the highest infant mortality rates in the country, yet the local maternity ward has just shut down and the local obstetrician is leaving.
The obstetrician paying $70,000 a year for malpractice insurance to deliver 40 or 45 patients, babies a year is just not feasible.
At the Hinton hot dog stand, they're quite willing to accept money from whoever's willing to give it, even from a foreign government.
Well, I hope they send us something. I'm all for it.
They have a saying in the hills, you have to hit the mule over the head with a 2x4 to get its attention.
We do not expect to get funded by these foreign governments. We might get funded by the World Health Organization just because there's no difference in a baby dying in Central Appalachia or Ethiopia or France or wherever in the world.
The British, the French, and yes, the Russians have all promised Hinton a response. Until then, donations have brought in enough money to keep the clinic going through the end of June. But this town will need a lot more if it is to have a future to go along with its past. Mark Phillips, CBS News, Hinton, West Virginia.
And that's the news from our world tonight. Dan Rather for the CBS Evening News. Bob Schieffer will be here tomorrow. Connie Chung on Sunday, followed by 60 Minutes on Sunday. I'll see you Monday. Have a great weekend.
This summer, it's baseball on CBS.
This is CBS.